and welcome to day 4 of Vlogmas 2021. I hope you're all having a lovely Saturday. It's Saturday, isn't it, on day 4? Yeah. Today's video is about the books that I read in the month of November. My God. Well, normally I do a mid-month wrap-up, but I just didn't do it in November. So we've got to talk about today 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 books. Highs and lows, 1 stars and 5 stars. So yeah, well, I suppose we could get on with that, but let's first of all look at this jumper. So maybe from the way I'm sitting, you can't actually see that it's a Christmas jumper, but I promise it is. This says Merry Everything, and they've taken out some of the characters and replaced them. For example, this R has been replaced with a gingerbread man. I wouldn't have even noticed that. This is a bit off-brand, isn't it? An old cocktail glass, but I like the old G in the shape of a reef. It's very nice. Next, last year David's mum got me this for Christmas on Christmas Day. I remember popping it on and going for a walk down the beach with my friend, because you were only allowed to meet up one-on-one last year, weren't you? And my poor old friend was on her own for Christmas last year, so went for a walk down the beach with her wearing this, and I remember feeling festive, if a bit, this is a weird old Christmas, isn't it? There's no one around. But yeah, that's the jumper. Next last year, got it for Christmas last year. So let's start with the books that I read. As I said, there's 12 of them. Let's start with this one, which was the first book I read in the month, and that was Hope Not Fear by Hassan Akkad. This is a proof copy which came out in September this year, and this is the extraordinary story of Hassan Akkad, written by himself. So Hassan was a Syrian refugee who made his way from Syria all the way up to Calais in order to cross the channel to come to the UK to become a refugee here. As well as that, he chronicled some of that journey by filming it and things like that. So he is also a BAFTA award winner. I don't know what, I think it might be, I don't know if it's a director, but he won a BAFTA for the work that he did on, I've really got something in my eye, the work that he did on that documentary. And then when the pandemic hit last year, he joined the London hospital. My goodness me, that's really itching. He joined a London hospital to become a COVID ward cleaner. And whilst all this is going on, he has continued to be a powerful activist. So this is his story from the horrible experiences that feels like a really fucking undermining word, from his experiences in Syria and across the continent trying to get it to the UK. This is, like, his story is just amazing, and in some ways it would feel disrespectful to give this book any less than a 5-star because of the journey that he's been through and all of the stuff that I was reading about, that I can't even, in my worst nightmares, I don't even imagine I would suffer at these sort of the hands of the people that he has suffered at. And the story itself was very eye-opening to me, and I do hope that a lot more people read this. Actually, weirdly, when I reviewed this, a lot of people said to me, oh, I've just started reading this, so I know it's definitely out there. It was also very strange to read. I said this about The Fell, which I read last month. It was unusual to read a book that was so happening in the pandemic, when the pandemic is still going on around us. This is from the early days of the pandemic, when a lot more was unknown, and there was a lot more, well, I guess I can say a lot more fear, but I still feel fearful now, so there was a lot more going on. But yeah, and he took part in a project where he would take photos of the people that he worked with, and they got involved with Kate Middleton and things like that. There's a lot packed in here. I gave it 4 stars because I don't feel like the writing was like my bestest writing I've ever read, but the story itself was just unbelievable. So yeah, and also it just made me think, like, what the fuck would we do without migrants, honestly? Like, we really would not have the country that we've got now. So yeah, would highly recommend. Next up was an audiobook that David and I listened to, and that was And Away by Bob Mortimer. And Bob Mortimer is a UK-based comedian. David and I, we've got links to this book in terms of the fact that the first audiobook that David and I listened to together was a book that Bob Mortimer did with his TV sort of partner, Paul Whitehouse. They've got a TV series called Gone Fishing, which is basically, I always say it's like borderline boring, but I always just love watching it. They go to various parts of the country and go fishing, and this book was the accompaniment to that, and we'd watched the series and enjoyed it, and listened to the audiobook of it and loved it. And then when we were going on holiday this year, we started listening to Bob Mortimer's autobiography, which tells of him sort of coming into comedy. As I said, he's a comedian based in the UK, but his sort of childhood and like his relationship with his mum, and he writes so beautifully, in a way that sort of shocked me. I guess I don't know why, but I guess I think as a comedian, as someone sort of like short, sharp, particularly like Bob Mortimer's brand of humour is very sort of bizarre, yeah, so for him to have all these wonderful words about his mother and his friends and things like that, and there's some really serious stuff in there as well. Like Bob had to have a quadruple heart bypass like a good few years ago, and that's what led him to go on to do this Gone Fishing documentary and things like that. And it's a lot about mortality and like the love he has for his wife and his sons, and wanting to look after that love and like to show them how much, because he knows he's really sick and he wants them to feel this love. And yeah, the whole thing was just, and I found myself like very moved during a lot of it, but also similarly like really laughing. He opens up with him having to go to his doctors. Like him having to go to his doctor about his heart and about the fact that like he could drop dead at any moment basically, and like he keeps going on about this tiny little low sink that's in his doctor's office. It's just so funny. I find him very funny. I find him very heartwarming, and yeah, just a nice bloke. And Dave and I really enjoyed it, and I gave it 4 stars, so yeah, we had a lovely time listening to it. Then next up was The Nickel Boys by Colson Whitehead. I just didn't get on with this, and I'm disappointed and saddened to know that, because like I just don't feel like the writing gelled with me. This was a book that was just over 200 pages, and it really sort of like felt like a lot longer book, and I really didn't ever want to go back to it. It covers a very difficult topic as well, which also like, but that's not the case. That's not always the case for me going back to books. I just don't think me and the writing gelled basically. But so it follows a young lad and him going to he's going to a college. He's a young black lad, and he's living in 1960s Florida, and he's going to college, and on the way to college there seems to become some sort of mistake, which ends up with him going to I don't know how they describe it, an academy, which is a segregated reform school claiming to provide an education which will equip its inmates to become honourable and honest men, and that is not going on here, and there's mistreatment and it's awful, and the things that I read about in here were sad and horrifying, and yeah, but I just didn't. Again, this is another one where the topic of the book and stuff leads me to believe that like I want to be able to give it a higher star rating, but for me the writing just didn't, I just didn't get on with it. But Colson Whitehead's all right without me. Like, not everyone's going to love all the books all the time. So there we go. That's number 3. Need to flip the page in my book now. Next up, I'm not going to go into too much detail about this because I did a whole video where I vlogged me reading Monsters by Emerald Fennell. I come across this book because Emerald Fennell, I watched Promising Young Woman earlier this year, loved it, and I also love Emerald Fennell in Call the Midwife, and she's also been in The Crown and things like that, and I wanted to expose myself to more of her material, and Monsters was a book that I read. Now, I found this hilarious. It's like a sort of YA. Well, I thought it was going to be YA. I actually thought, like, based on the cover and like the publisher, I thought it was going to be sort of like more middle grade into YA, but there is like some bad swear words in here and some really fucking fucked up shit that goes on, she says after saying bad swear words. But yeah, I really loved it. I found it hilarious, like darkly hilarious. The stuff in there that was like completely fucked up, I was like, oh my god, but compelled to keep reading on. And yeah, I just think the characterization's really good, and yeah, it's about a young girl whose parents have died and she lives with her grandmother, and she goes to spend every summer with her auntie and uncle at their seaside hotel, and her auntie and uncle don't like her. There's a lot of sort of like, I was getting a lot of like Roald Dahl vibes in terms of like having to go and live with people, like relatives that you don't get on with, etc. And then there seems to be bodies appearing in this seaside town, and her and another young kid in the hotel start looking into it. But yeah, really enjoyed it. Thought it was really good, but yeah, bad language and like some well fucked up shit, but enjoyed it nevertheless. Next up was a 5-star book. It's Fingersmith by Sarah Waters. I've got this copy here, but I actually listened to it on audiobook. I did plan to sort of do a bit, but I just gelled with the audiobook so well. I gave it 5 stars. Sarah Waters' books, I just seem to be having a real, like, every time I've read one of them, it seems to have come at exactly the right time, or just like, I've just had such a lovely all-encompassing, like, journey and experience with them. Now, I don't really want to go into too much about the plot points here, because there is some of the biggest, twistiest twist I've ever experienced in my entire life. Like, I yelped when a twist happened here. So what is happening, if I give you the bare bones of the story, is that you're following a young girl called Susan Trinder, Sue Trinder. And she works, well, she's living with a woman in London, and a sort of like ragtag bag of like thieves, and there's all sorts going on, and they're sort of like just getting by day to day, and she gets sort of recruited to do this job where she will go and become a lady's maid to a young girl who one of the guys that is associated with this sort of ring of criminals or whatever is going to marry this young girl who is entitled to a large fortune, and then take the money from her, and then Sue will get some of the money, and the people that she lives with will get some of the money, and it all goes from there. But yeah, the research and stuff that I think Sarah Waters does is just amazing. I was having a chat with Mercedes about this, because I was saying that it's been a really long time since Sarah Waters last brought out a book, and like, I've read a lot of her books, The Paying Guest being another one, which like so much research went into, Tipping the Velvet, The Night Watch. Like, there's so much detail in here that it just feels perfect to me. It just feels so perfect, and I loved it. And yeah, I think this is the best Sarah Waters I have read, and I've only got Affinity left to read now, so yeah, I'll have to earmark that for a good moment, unless she brings out another one, which I'd really like, Sarah, if you could crack on with that. However, from a 5-star to a 1-star, this is Fragile by Sarah Hillary. I read this when I was on holiday. I've given this 1 star. Now, this, to me, when I was reading this, it was making me cross. Can you tell I was cross? Because I've got a bit... but this, to me, when I was reading it, it was so vague and so sort of wishy-washy that it almost felt like the second or even like the third in a series, and I'd missed some really massive plot points, and like all these characters were being alluded to as if you should really know them already, and I didn't know anything about them, and names were coming in that I'd never heard of, and this was happening, and then I was thinking if I missed something, and I hadn't missed anything. I just thought it was... like, really did not enjoy it at all. In here, I was so lured in by it, because it was saying that it's a gothic masterpiece, similar to Rebecca. Someone else said this here. Rebecca meets The Handmaid's Tale. There's nothing to do with Rebecca in here apart from it's in a house and there's a fire. Like, that's the only link they've got. And yeah, I just thought it was really bad. I was just looking at it because it was such a long time ago. I'm just seeing if there's anything more I said about it. But yeah, I've just put here vague and lacking in so much character backstory and plot points. This felt frustrating and pointless. I almost felt like I was reading a book in a series I hadn't read the first book blurb of. Yeah, and I've also put here that I was disappointed to have wasted my time on it, and honestly that is how I felt. I did feel disappointed to have wasted my time on it, so try not to waste your time on it. Next up was Crying in H Mart by Michelle Zauner. This is a memoir of Michelle's, of the time, well, mainly about her mother's death, and the time preluding her mother's death by cancer, and the time after that. And it's a lot tied up in Korean culture and food, Korean food, and her wanting to be able to care for her mother in the way that her mother's cared for her whole life, and not being able to do that, and food being tied up in that, and also language being tied up in that, and geographical distance being tied up in that. It was so sad and really made me think a lot about death, which isn't always something I love to do, guys. I gave it 4 stars because I really thought the writing was great, and like even it pulled me in. It pulled me in, even though it's something that I really wasn't enjoying reading in terms of the content of it, because it was really making me feel sad. So sad. I felt so sad when I was reading this, but it was so I was so pulled into it, and just so immersed in the time that she was having, and wanting to do what she could for her mother, and like the sort of fraughtness that surrounds death, as well as it being like a terribly sad time, it being like a terribly angry time as well, and her anger towards other members of her family who were able to communicate with her mother better, because her mother seemed to be reverting to Korean when she was very, very poorly, and she had a Korean relative there with her, and them talking in Korean, and that being a real bother, and then her also trying to live her life sort of like back where she was living, because her mother lived far away from her, and trying to stay in touch that way. And oh my god, there was just so much tied up in this. But yeah, it really really saddened me, but also I really enjoyed it, and I loved the food parts of it. I really love this sort of aspect that seems to be happening more and more recently in terms of like food being associated with memoir. I read Brown Baby earlier this year by Nikesh Shukla, which I also really enjoyed, which also associated food with memoir and the death of his mother as well. But yeah, I thought it was really powerful in here. It's really like swept up with nostalgia and things like that, isn't it, food? And also another one that I've read this year that's been amazing is Hunger by Grace Dent, which is a lot to do with food and the death of her father. So yeah, there's all this host of like memoirs that are tied up with this, but brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Oh guys, I've got a really sad one to talk about next that I really didn't enjoy, and I almost feel a bit about it. It's the Twyford Code by Janice Hallett. Now, you'll know that I read The Appeal earlier this year and absolutely, like, could not put it down. I gave it 4 stars. It was, honestly, it just consumed my mind for 2 days. And I literally got home from work one day, just sat down and read it, and then did the same the next day, got home and just read it. And I absolutely loved it. And when I found out she had a new book coming out in January next year, I was so excited to get my hands on the proof copy of it. And it's so tough when you're reviewing a book that hasn't yet come out, and you always want to promote books. This is a bookish channel, but like they gave this to me for an honest review, and my honest review is that I really didn't get on with it at all. So The Appeal was told through emails and text messages and parish council minutes and things like that. So it was very sort of like multimedia book, and I was expecting much the same from the Twyford Code, and in a way it is written in a way that I've never read before. So it's written, and I wonder if I would have got on with it better as an audiobook, but it's written that an iPhone has been discovered, and on that iPhone there are a series of voice notes which have been left by a man talking about the disappearance of his teacher when he was at school, and some other activity around that. Again, don't want to give the whole plot away, but that's what it's based on. And that means that the voice notes, which are now being translated and have been translated into text for me to read, have like a lot of spelling mistakes in it. So for example, the teacher that goes missing, her name is Miss Isles, which means that it comes up whenever you read it as Miss Isles, the word Miss Isles. The school trip that they went on that she ended up going missing from was in Bournemouth, and that is represented by Bournemouth every time. And it's just complex and confusing and jarring, and there's so much going on. And very quickly on in this book, I decided I didn't give a shit. Like, I really thought, I'm not getting on with this. And I persevered. And do you know what? The pulling together of it in the end is clever, and I was surprised by it all. But by that point, I had lost complete interest, and I just had nothing. I couldn't wait for it to be over. I couldn't wait for it to be over. So yeah, I was really disappointed with this. And like I said, I wonder if maybe if I'd have listened to it, it would have been a bit different. But sad, isn't it, when you really like something and then you don't get on with the next thing. Next up, I listened to the audiobook of Brutally Honest by Mel B. Mel B's a Spice Girl, Scary Spice. She used to be my favourite Spice Girl back in the day, but Jerry then has crept in as my favourite Spice Girl. But this is a book, a memoir about her time, well, it's about a lot of her life, but mainly the focus of this is about an abusive relationship that she was in and gets out of whilst, this book chronicles her getting into the relationship and getting out of it. I listened to it on audiobook. Mel B is severely dyslexic, and she doesn't narrate it. What I did think was really good is that she said that she interviewed loads of Northern actresses. She's from Leeds, and they interviewed loads of Northern actresses to find someone who would really sound like her. And the girl who ended up doing it did really sound like her. So Mel B does the introduction, but also people in her family do talk in the book as well. So her daughter, her mother, and one of her close friends, I think her hairdresser as well, talk about the experiences that they had with this man that she was in an abusive relationship with. And like that stuff, that is what I was expecting the whole book to be about, but also with other sort of flourishes. But oh my god, so the stuff in there about her being in this relationship and the control he has over her, and like her being a Spice Girl and being super famous and still sort of being at the hands of this awful man, was really powerful and like oh my God, and I didn't know this about her. But I had to weigh it up against the fact that literally through the whole book, she's like, oh, when I won't do a Leeds accent, and I was out with Heidi Klum, and she was saying that I looked the best I'd ever looked, and I was looking really sexy, and everyone on Twitter was talking about me, and I bought this house, and this cost this much, and I've got 12 Jeeps at my house, and that's how many Jeeps I own, and I can tell you how many Dior dresses I've bought. And I get it, because a lot of it was, you can have all of this stuff, and you can be as famous as you want, and you can have so much money, and own so many houses, and be friends with really famous people, but you can still be in an abusive relationship. And I get that, but it was relentless. The name dropping, I would just never have got off the floor, because it was name dropping constantly. She couldn't say something without talking about how much it cost. She couldn't talk about somewhere she was living without saying how many other houses she had. And then, so that was sort of like the first half of the book. And then the second half of the book, she starts bringing in that she doesn't care about money, and she can have as much fun in a working men's club in Leeds as she can at the Chateau Marmont and things like that. And I gave it 2 stars, and I was talking to my colleague about it, and I was saying, like, it almost got to a point where I was finding it comical, like how much she was sort of dropping all these prices and names, and how many of something she owned, and how many houses she's got, and stuff like that. Yeah, it bemused me. But yeah, I don't think I've got any more to say on it, apart from it was what it was, basically. And then into the last 3 books. So I've got here Black Joy, this is edited by Charlie Brinkhurst-Cuff and Timmy Sotir. This is a collection of essays about Black Joy, which is wonderful, and I had a really, really nice time reading it. And there's so many sort of like essays in here from sorts of, from some of the essays, they go from like making a delicious, I'm going to mention it again like I did with Crying in H Mart, like making your mum's favourite dish that she ate when she was a child, to sort of like finding a black colleague at work and bonding over something that you both know about, and like there was just so much joy in here. What I also really liked is it was sort of very carefully curated, also lovely illustrations throughout a lot of it as well. But at the back with the contributors, they all had like their favourite Black Joy song, so it was just so nice. Like, I think there'd been a lot of, what with Black Lives Matters and stuff, I bought a lot of books last year about the black experience and things like that, and a lot of it was, I can't think of the actual word, I want to say black trauma, but I don't think it is, but like a lot to do with like, yeah, trauma, basically, like being a victim of racism, and all sorts of stuff. And this doesn't shy away from this. This still covers the fact that this still acknowledges that the racism's there, this is happening, they've been brought up like this, they were told this as a child, but there's also like the joy in there, and it really was joyful. There were authors in here which I did know about, like people that I wouldn't associate with writing, and in that way I think it couldn't get more than a 3-star for me, because it wasn't like the best writing I've ever read, and there's essays in here from like pop stars and comedians and things like that, as well as writers, and as is the case with essays collections, isn't it? You're not always gonna, like when you get an anthology, you're not always gonna love all the writing about everything, but yeah, I would really highly recommend. And yeah, I thought it was a great collection and a great subject matter. Last 2 books, both 5 stars, both rereads. The first one is Bridget Jones's Diary and Other Writings. This is the 25th anniversary edition. Read this for my Patreon book club, had an amazing discussion. Even the people, because I knew this wasn't going to be for everyone. This is one of my favourite books, and for November in Patreon book club we were doing Lauren's favourites because it's my birthday month. So I knew this wasn't going to be everyone's fave, because it's dated quite badly. There's a lot in there about fat phobia and body image and men treating you like shit, but fuck me, this is honestly, I think this is the funniest book I've ever read. I love the diary aspect of it, the way it's written as a diary, and it just feels like she's speaking right to me. I feel like I'm really repeating myself with everything that I said in Patreon book club, but like I've read this book so many times throughout my life, different times, and always got something from it, but always the main feeling is that of hilarity and solidarity with Bridget, and just loved it. As I said, this is the 25th anniversary edition, and there was so much great bonus material in here. I've also got the 20th anniversary edition, which has got a foreword from Caitlin Moran in it. But this had so much stuff from like Helen Fielding writing for the column over the years, and sort of like photos she'd taken of things, and talking about and like excerpts of Bridget nowadays and how Bridget would have coped in a pandemic, and her talking about how there's a lot of, I remember there's a lot about Keir Starmer, who's currently the leader of the Labour Party, and how Mark Darcy was based on Keir Starmer. Helen and Keir used to sort of like knock about in the same circles, and like she really takes it to extremes in the bonus material, sort of when she's talking about when Bridget is watching Keir Starmer and Boris Johnson sort of going at it on Question Time, and she's talking about like likening Keir Starmer to Mark Darcy and likening Boris Johnson to Daniel Cleaver, and I just think she's really playing with you there. But yeah, the bonus material in this is great as well. Like if you know someone that loves Bridget Jones, then this would be a great gift, because like the bonus material in here is completely worth it. I remember other books I've got where I've got bonus material, I haven't always been as enamoured in it, but I enjoyed the bonus material as much as I enjoyed the actual book. So 5 stars as always. And then lastly, the last book I read in November was Anne of Green Gables by L.M. Montgomery. Is it Lucy Maud Montgomery? I listened to the audiobook of this, and it was performed by Rachel McAdams. You know Rachel McAdams from Mean Girls, Regina George, and all sorts of other things. Notebook, Wedding Crashers, Sherlock Holmes. And she did a wonderful narration of this book. And I read it last year and loved it. I really must get on with the rest of the series, because like I love it so much, and I'm so sort of warmed in it. Anne I just love, and like Rachel McAdams really got across the sort of dreaminess of Anne and how romantic everything was, which I really, really loved. But yeah, this is just a book that I can't believe that it took me so long to sort of find, having discovered it last year and gotten so much joy out of it, and then listening to the audiobook this year and loving it again. So yeah, I have got the whole series. I can see them looking at me. Anne of Avonlea is the next one, isn't it, in the series? So I will get to those hopefully next year, although I remember saying this last year as well, because I read it for the first time and loved it and was like, oh, I got David's sister bought me this collection for my birthday, and I remember thinking 2021, that's the year to read all the Anne of Green Gables, but still haven't done it, but we'll do it. So yeah, 5 stars again. So those were the books that I read in November, all 12 of them. Let me know what you read in November. Let me know if you've read any of these books that I've mentioned today, and I'll see you all again soon for another booktube video, another Vlogmas video tomorrow. Bye.